Wow, Barklord, you seem to have a really bad attitude about scientists, and I want to talk to you about it. Now, I don't feel that that my criticism of metaphysics applies to you at all. But I know how it is from your side. You might think, well, yeah, let's think about this for a while. I mean, do you think I use science, I refer to science in a controlling, authoritarian way? I mean, am I an example of that? Or do you just think that by me paying a lip service to science, I'm supporting what science really is? But, yeah, I mean, as you said, even if science found something out, people wouldn't do it. Right. People's violence is a part of people. They do it with everything. Every human movement or institution has been abused. I mean, Darwinism. How did all the animals get here? It's a fairly innocent thought process. It's used for racism and eugenics, and used. Except for, was it really successfully used? Just because people say those words and other people accept them, does that really mean that it's, that laissez-faire economics is Darwinist? No. It's not Darwinist when you've got like some inventions like money, inventions of man. That's not just leave it to the jungle. Besides, Darwin never said that this is the way things ought to be. Just because they have worked in this particular ecological system doesn't mean that's the way the system has to be. That's the way the system goes when there's no consciousness. And if a system like that creates consciousness, there's plenty of reason to say, hey, let's use the consciousness now that it's here. But yeah, so scientists, I mean, it depends on the science, doesn't it? But I mean, in general, I think it's fair to say these are geeky people that are not super obsessed with controlling other people. They're more obsessed with finding out how things work. Now they get the wrong end of the stick, and the scientific community has all of the problems you would expect, but I think it's better at dealing with them. It's a fairly liberal community, most. Now, the scientists I have the most experience with are types of physicists. I worked my way through college at NASA Ames Research Center about 6 years, which I can say because I was an actual civil servant for a while. I was also a contractor in the Space Sciences Division. And then I worked in the UC Berkeley astronomy department for a couple years when I finished school. And before I went into commercial .com-y type stuff. .com-y. That's a good one. Okay. If I do say so myself, which I did. So, these are a fairly non-authoritarian group of people. Now, the thing is, scientists have a way of treating everybody as an equal, at least at first blush. On the other hand, there's an irony there where reputation matters, where you went to school matters. On the other hand, if you have results, that'll retroactively justify where you went to school and point out to people, oh, hey, genius comes from everywhere. But, your publications and various things, and younger scientists are famously aware of the disproportionate power that older scientists can have. But again, that's because their influence starts coming from Washington. Washington might know of a certain scientist that has established reputation outside science or among some group, some funding group. And so they get a power from outside science. Science as a community is really very good at policing arbitrary things like authority. It bothers me, and it's almost comes across to me as bigoted. I mean, this is a culture of people of probably a lot of Asperger. people that really care about the things they're studying, by and large. And you are offering a caricature. And remember, I mean, the video I made was about you don't compel other people. So you had this reaction in a video where I guess I happened to reveal a scientism or something. To me, the science is like a flashlight. You're shining it somewhere, and the people that go, "Oh, look, we see what exists," and I'm like, "No, that's just what you're looking at. It's not, yeah, it exists, but I mean, there's other things that exist, and there's stuff outside the light. We'll have to walk over there to see." It's a method that has an approach that knows it itself is incomplete. It breaks down the concept of right and wrong in the sense that there must be some way for there to be an incomplete truth that you wouldn't want to call wrong, but it's not right in the traditional sense because it's incomplete. But it doesn't know it's incomplete, so there's patches over the holes, and those are wrong. And it knows that. And although the assumptions, they're not held like metaphysical assumptions. Like metaphysical assumptions often, and again, I want to point out that the Stanford article specifically says there is no criteria. Things put in metaphysics these days are just put there out of tradition. There is no philosophical criteria that all the things considered metaphysics fit. And consider Aristotle invented this category. I don't believe he called it metaphysics, but he invented this category, and in translation metaphysics, with criteria associated. So, at least it implied criteria, that there was a distinction there. And now there is no criteria. I don't get why you'd feel a need to hold on to that. It's a tradition that says you have to believe these things in order to reason. So I have to be sure that there's an ether to make an experiment to check if there's one. No, truths can be held conditionally. It's like, hey, if the sun doesn't really rise but the earth is spinning, what else might be true? Well, the shadow of a stick at noon at high noon is nothing, and maybe I can measure the angle and length of that all throughout the year and see if the mathematics relates to being on a spherical spinning thing. Yeah, I'll check that, and then if I'm right about this guess that I guessed because of a conditional idea, well, then I'll have some confirmation. Will I know it for sure? No, but maybe I can think of other things to check and double check. Maybe I can send her something to the moon and start to get really confident. And maybe I'll break it down to the point where, well, if the earth isn't a spinning sphere, then I guess it's a matrix because somebody's making it look exactly like a spinning sphere. Or the other direction, higher accuracy. Ooh, it's not really a spinning sphere. It's a slightly tiny bit ellipsoidal, though it's an amazing sphere. But I just think you have a bad attitude. It's like people, the Nazis were all scientific, and yeah, that's why Nazi scientists were, like live vivisection. They did that. It was science. I mean, they were also, crazy occultists, but that's probably not what led to that. It's science that usually scientists end up becoming genocidal maniacs. And that's almost what you're saying. And you're really describing this consumerist technology society, and you don't seem to realize how far, far away from the scientific community's mores and value system technical gadgets are. they a lot of the stuff they use is primitive. They're not necessarily the early adopter of consumer technology, iPhones or whatever. Yeah, I really am curious who you're thinking of. It's like you've made a boogeyman out of science because man would exploit science, or scientists offer too much knowledge that man's not ready for. You still can't blame science. Man might not be ready for it, but how's it going to get ready for it? How do you cure future shock without future? And I do believe science can be used for everything, but I don't have the same view of science as most people because they don't know what is really going on. Science is not limited. And this whole structure of it's 1, 2, 3 and we shall vivisect, and that's classical science. That attitude, that aura, for one thing. That's not what's going on. Science is a world of wonder, like they know what the unanswered questions are. Do you understand that? Scientists are experts in what the unanswered questions are. And if they're not, they'll answer questions that aren't of interest to any of the other scientists because scientists study what the unanswered questions are. It bothers me that you would malign that. And it goes anywhere. You can do spiritual research. People with a stick up their butt might say, oh no, that's not scientific. But this stuff you're talking about, like meditation, you can see the results. But why can't that be scientific? Don't you realize that can be scientific? It's not physics directly, but it's consistent. And I would say, yeah, it'll also have a physical explanation eventually, because physics really just comes from material facts. And which are those? They're the ones that have a certain kind of consistency. And I believe all real things have a consistency. If you can go back to a meditative practice and it has that material kind of consistency, then there's something real there. And it's just like the sun rising. Maybe it's not really rising, we're spinning, but it apparently rises. It apparently rises. And the heat from it changes angle. A lot of the physical effects of rising are the same with the parent rising where we're spinning versus it moving. Doesn't actually matter for a lot of the physical characteristics. Right? So if you find out there's something to a certain kind of meditation, you're going to begrudge me thinking there's a physical explanation. I'm not saying I know it right now. I'm just saying, let me guess, let me play with it. This is something interesting. I like to find these things out. And it shouldn't really matter if it turns out there's chi flowing through the universe and you're channeling it, or if it turns out that your brain is a quantum computer and this is the way you subjectively experience operating it, or it turns out that your brain is a classical computer and this is how it programs itself and repairs itself or heals itself, or you know what I mean, whatever the reason, it won't change what you'd already experienced. That part will just be added to in detail as to suggestions why it works for you, why it makes you feel a certain way. And in cognitive science, we see a fusion of science and philosophy finally that I think shows how all questions can be asked this way. And there's a science of metaphor. It's not just for art and poetry. It is also for epistemology, because I do believe the demonstrations that human beings think in metaphors. All the metaphors root back to the body, space and time, sense and motor. And so what's left out of that? All you need to do to look at anything scientifically, it doesn't make you a professional scientist, but to get the knowledge out of it is to be empirical, right? To be as honest as possible. If you invent a new way to double check your own self-honesty, then you can use that new thing, because the issue is not how it's been done in the past. The gist of it is to be as honest with yourself as possible about the facts. Double check. Assume maybe you misread something. Assume you have a systematic bias. Part of your scientific study is to know thyself. And frankly, even if you don't figure yourself out, ways to double check and find out that you're making some systematic bias that you can recover from, that you can use a measuring stick instead of just saying how something is. Honestly, I mean, and if you are honest and find that you don't pretend things have happened a certain way, then there's a lot left over. And I've always said, that I have a spiritual materialism or spiritual atheism. I believe spiritual feelings, I have empirically experienced those and done all my kinds of absorption and analysis of them than I do of any other kinds of facts. And they're facts just like seeing red or hearing a sound or feeling hunger or having felt that kind of pheromonal, hormonal attraction where you just know you're having this feeling, want it or not, understand it or not. And they're spiritual feelings, and they're material. And I'm sure there's a material reason. I'm also sure probably most of the explanations won't suit me. But whatever, I'm open to hearing about them, and I imagine Frankensteining things together pretty well with ideas people have already thought up. But I'm really interested in the new, I think we're at a threshold where we can expect some new interpretations and understandings of what these spiritual feelings mean. If there is something in common about them between people, because there's obviously something very personal about which things feel spiritual. I personally think that you simply need to follow that feeling, and it's going to lead you to some realizations. That's what I found in my life. And if there were a binding thing, I think that eventually spiritual feelings lead to a feeling of connection with the biosphere, the planet, solar system, galaxy, laws of physics. And but that's just my guess as to where it seems to lead when you get to peer way down the road. And the road goes down into a valley and you can see the road, 60 miles away. Looks like it goes to a place like that. But I definitely feel it goes to a place where you can understand yourself and make better decisions. I've always listened to these feelings and taken them seriously, but not literally, because they're weird. They're like dreams. They require interpretation. But you must interpret them and find out where you're going in your life. Like I always knew there was going to be a midlife crisis at 40. I saw all the men, and it's like, it's not always just upper middle class stereotype, trophy wife, red car. It's all kinds of reevaluation. You keep clear on your spiritual path. You don't have to have some sort of a U-turn in your life when you find out that you're programmed with some like weird metabolic or hormonal period of life, like puberty or anything else. I mean, even included puberty, as confusing as that is, I had this idea through childhood, and I think it helped me face that time. It's confusing, and it helps if you've listened to your spiritual experiences. I've looked out at vistas, or I've taken walks and come. Okay, here's an example of a spiritual thing. I took a birthday walk once, often. This one behind my, I lived up in the mountains in California, and behind the cabin I was living in, where my first daughter was born, and I just hiked. I saw a rock in the mountains. And I'm like, I wasn't going to hike to that. It was too far away, but I said, I'll use that as my bearing. We'll go. And I hiked, and I went through all kinds of cool stuff on this trail. And I came up to this little hilltop, a little glen, the kind of place you run into if you hike out in the woods. And it's just like all the trees changed, and suddenly there's a little tiny little aspen glen. And I could see lots of animals came and visited the spot because I saw their scat of many different animals there. And it had that kind of fairy spot feeling. You know, it's like boom, and light, you know, shining through bars of light. And it was, when I got there, I was like, whoa. And it was a spiritual feeling to me. And I sat there and I thought, and I reconsidered the thoughts that came to my mind. And I looked for the signs of all the animals that were visiting this spot. And it's similar if you go to a watering hole and you see lots of animals that come around. It's like it almost makes it spiritual. But this was interesting. This was like at the top of a little hill. And there might have been some vegetables or something good like that to eat there. But to me that blends into, okay, well maybe my spiritual sense is that I can just sense that there's something like edible. No. Because, you know, looking at a vista, to me the most reliable spiritual feelings have come from spending time in nature, being brave, and not being lazy, and doing real stuff in nature. But it can also happen any time. I consider those moments where things just crystallize and you're like, I don't know why this is important, but look, I see everything for a second. Wow, there's a book of matches. You know, and then later it's like, a child got the book of matches and lit the bookcase on fire. Oh, I should have picked those up. A lot of those kinds of experiences at the time, it's like, you know, it doesn't matter to me if it's psychological entirely, which that's my fallback position and pretty much what I live by. It's my brain. It has a way of doing gestalt. I'm listening, you know? It's like the feeling of hunger. Is God telling me to eat food? Well, no. Or yeah, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It is your way. There's a material relation. I think there's something material to spirituality, but it's not to feed yourself. It's not. Was just using those as examples. I think it's to see beyond your individuality. Individuality is sacred, and luckily we have a built-in sense that we could see beyond that with, and make the individual spiritual, which unites the individual with the universe. And to me, knowing the physical sciences, it doesn't just help that, it enables it. It's the only way I know that it can be done.